Okay, this is part 22, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. I had ended the last part with the fall of Napoleon and the rise of the British Empire, and also with the charter of a new bank in the United States in 1816. After the fall of Napoleon, the British Empire became the dominant world power, but the real power behind it was the British East India Company. Most of the benefit of the British Empire went to the oligarchs behind the company and to very few of the British people themselves. The British oligarchy then embarked on a policy of controlling the seas, protecting any areas along the sea routes that could threaten British shipping, and suppressing any rival power on mainland Europe. This world oligarchy would use the Congress of Vienna to justify these goals. Napoleon had emancipated the Jews on the continent of Europe except in Russia. His enemies knew that he might be unstoppable if he were victorious over Russia, and the British Empire and its Jewish allies opposed Napoleon's emancipation of the Jews in the part of Russia that had once been part of Poland, which at that time had about half of the population of Jews in the entire world. This appears to be because Jews could be used against the Tsars to control or eliminate them once the balance of power had shifted in favor of Russia. There is an account that one of the Rothschilds attended the Congress of Vienna, and he had requested a title of nobility and was supposedly ridiculed by Tsar Alexander I of Russia. For this, it's claimed that the Rothschilds sought revenge on the Tsars of Russia from then on. The Rothschilds would become the official bankers for the Russian Tsars later, and it's believed that the Rothschilds also became bankers for the Vatican in 1823. The Rothschild bankers would be used also as a tool of the British Empire. The rising ambitions of the British Empire were led by Viscount Palmerston, a Freemason and believed to be also a member and leader at one time of the Illuminati. It was becoming more common for aristocrats like Palmerston to be involved with Freemasonry, since Francis, Duke of Lorraine, had joined it about a century earlier, and he had also linked the shadowy Lorraine dynasty with the Habsburgs by marrying Maria Theresa, Habsburg Empress of Austria. The Merovingian Lorraine dynasty would continue to rule behind the scenes, almost taking the throne of France through Marie Antoinette, the daughter of Francis and Maria Theresa. After the defeat of Napoleon in France, Russia became the main threat to the British Empire. Russia was beginning to threaten the Ottoman Empire as it declined in power. Palmerston and his operatives feared that rising Russia and a resurging France could get too much influence over populations of the crumbling Ottoman Empire. Catholic France had natural rule over the many Catholics in parts of the Ottoman Empire, and Orthodox Russia had natural dominion over the large Orthodox population of the Ottoman Empire. The British East India Company would also profit selling opium for gold in China, destabilizing the rival Chinese empire in the process. Incidentally, some American families involved in the opium trade were Delano, who later married into the Roosevelts, and Yale, who founded the university of that name. In its divide and conquer scheme, the Palmerston faction would use Islam to destabilize the Russian and French empires. Ethnic so-called blood and soil division would also be used to cause useful instability in these empires as well as in the Ottoman Empire. Ethnic Turks would be used against Russia. Ethnic Slavs would be used against the Ottoman Turks. Kurds and Armenians would also be used as a tool to control the Ottoman Empire. And if that wasn't enough, ethnic groups would also be used against each other in a macabre, bloody Machiavellian nightmare. The Palmerston faction would also seek to divide and conquer the United States, which was also a threat to the British Empire. It would use the cry of so-called free trade to heighten worldwide support of the empire, especially in the United States, but this was really just a smokescreen since trade was really being controlled by an oligarchy dominating the sea trade routes. Master Mason William Morgan was arrested on September 11, 1826 on likely trumped-up charges, and noticed the occult date of September 11th again. He disappeared soon after and was presumably murdered for revealing secrets of Freemasonry. It's believed, though, that Morgan was really exposing a Rothschild plot to infiltrate American Freemasonry. Morgan's disappearance ultimately led to a political movement against Freemasonry called the Anti-Masonic Party. The movement appeared to be really against infiltration and was ultimately led by Thaddeus Stevens. A plot to divide the United States with civil war was delayed for many years by the Anti-Masonic Party, which eventually joined the Whig Party. The charter of the Bank of the United States was set to end in 1836. Andrew Jackson was able to keep the charter of the Bank of the United States from being renewed. Banking powers retaliated by contracting the money supply of the United States, and the United States government overreacted, which resulted in the Panic of 1837. In 1840, Foreign Secretary Palmerston sent troops to Palestine, launching the Zionist movement. Palmerston had claimed that Jews desired to return to Palestine, but it's been shown that many Jews had no such intention and were not even aware of it. Jewish allies of the British Empire could act as a counter to Catholic allies of France and Orthodox allies of Russia. In 1843 in New York, B'nai B'rith was founded. B'nai B'rith just means sons of the covenant, and you might ask if this was a Bible covenant or a covenant with Mithra. The order was founded as a secret Jewish society and a branch of Freemasonry. Palmerston would use this faction of the Jewish community for his purposes in the United States. A lodge of Scottish Rite Freemasonry had existed in Charleston, South Carolina as early as 1801. It had been set up by the Tory faction with British ties. There were many old families of Sephardic Jews involved with the lodge. They were known to have been heavily involved in the slave trade. B'nai B'rith used the lodge for its operations in the American South and connections with British Jews. It was instrumental in fomenting division in the United States. Charleston is on the 33rd parallel north latitude, just like ancient Babylon was. Scottish Rite Freemasonry had major operations in New York City in the north and Charleston in the south. Charleston had the largest lodge of Freemasonry and synagogue in the south. Both cities were heavily Jewish. It's interesting that all the internal documents of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Lodge in Charleston from 1801 to 1860 were burned. Palmerston was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1855 to 1865. He presided over the Crimean War to eliminate the Russian threat to the British Empire's Mediterranean sea routes to the Suez Canal. He also presided over the Second Opium War with the aid of France against China. The British Empire, along with other European powers, propped up what was left of the Ottoman Empire as a hedge against Russia's sea ambitions in the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea. In 1854, a secret terrorist organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle was established, also with connections to Freemasonry. Its purpose was to ensure the expansion of slavery, break up the United States, and add the American South to a French empire based in Mexico. Rothschild banking operatives and B'nai B'rith would also act as agents in the plot. They operated in headquarters of Cincinnati in the north and Charleston in the south. The British Empire would take the northern regions of the defeated United States, and France would take the south, as well as Mexico and parts of Central and South America and the Caribbean. The Knights of the Golden Circle would illegally invade Mexico and other countries in something what was called filibustering, aiding Napoleon III's French troops and supporting the Mexican kingdom of Habsburg Maximilian. The scheme was intensified in the 1850s after being delayed by the anti-Masonic Party and Jackson's shutdown of a central bank of the United States, no doubt operated by foreign bankers, especially the Rothschilds. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry has been said to have heralded the American Civil War. He was secretly supported by an abolitionist group known as the Secret Six. It's claimed that damning proof of the conspiracy was found on John Brown himself in his bag. The identity of the Secret Six was widely known at the time. They were financed by Giuseppe Mazzini, one-time leader of the Illuminati, and the Rothschilds. The American Civil War was clearly a divide-and-conquer action in which the United States would be divided on north-south lines by the British Empire led by Palmerston and the British Crown, and a resurgent French Empire led by Napoleon III and allied with Habsburg Austria. The Catholic Church would also act as agents for the French-Austrian scheme. The American Civil War is often called the War of Northern Aggression. Even though the war was started by Southern forces, neither was it a war of Southern aggression. Most Southerners didn't want war. The war was started by pro-slavery elites in the South with ties to European banks and aristocracy. It was also fomented by radical abolitionists who were almost all communist transcendentalists connected to the Rothschilds and no doubt descended from the so-called Puritans. Radical abolitionists wanted to impose communism in the United States and only outwardly oppose slavery. It's often claimed that the war was really over so-called states' rights and tariffs. The start of the war at Charleston is said to have been ignited by the struggle for Charleston's tariff revenue, but New Orleans had far more tariff revenue than Charleston. As for states' rights, they were violated by Confederate leader Jefferson Davis himself when he forced a military draft on all Southerners. Davis was a high-level Freemason and member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. He worked with Judah P. Benjamin and B'nai B'rith. Abraham Lincoln was only against the expansion of slavery, and he was not an abolitionist. Tsar Alexander II threatened both the Rothschilds and Britain with war if they openly supported the South in the war. The Tsar sent ships from Russian naval bases on the Pacific to blockade the American coast from British involvement. In 1863, Lincoln and Tsar Alexander also coordinated emancipation in both the United States and Russia. These seem to be more reasons why the Rothschilds took vengeance on the Russian czars years later. Albert Pike, a Grand Master of Freemasonry and a one-time leader of the Illuminati, was instrumental in coaxing state congresses in the South to move for secession when it was not really desired by most Southerners. Some other members of the Illuminati instrumental in fomenting and operating the war were Judah P. Benjamin, John Quitman, Caleb Cushing, and John Slidell. Abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison was also a member of the Illuminati. Banker and German Jew August Belmont, who changed his name from Schoenberg to hide his Jewish origins, operated in the North like Judah Benjamin in the South. Belmont was a representative of the Rothschilds in the United States and financed both B'nai B'rith and the Knights of the Golden Circle. He was influential in the Democratic Party and promoted so-called states' rights and free trade, positions taken up by slavery expansionists, and the linchpins of Palmerston's divide and conquer scheme against the United States. With all his financial support of Southern interests, it's curious that he profited by selling weaponry to the Union in the war. General William Tecumseh Sherman had been in charge of gold shipments for the United States Army during the California gold rush of the 1850s. It seems that his experience was used again during the war as he rampaged through the South. Was he in charge of the gold looted from the vanquished population of the South? Getting gold and silver were foremost in the chaos of the war. In the final days of the war and devastations of the South, there were reports of rough German-speaking Union soldiers pillaging across the South. Were these pro-Union Jewish Germans looting treasures for Sherman in the confusion of the war? Sherman's son was a Jesuit priest, so this further hints at Catholic connections in the war. It's interesting, too, that the only cities destroyed in the war, North and South, were all Protestant, such as Atlanta, Richmond, and Chambersburg. Catholic New Orleans was untouched. It seems that revenge was sought on Thaddeus Stevens for opposing Freemasonry and leading the Emancipation movement. Did Freemasons orchestrate the battles on his property around Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? The Battle of Gettysburg transpired from July 1st to 3rd, 1863. This is another clear instance of the occult date subtly declaring Freemasonic involvement. There is a historical plaque at the Gettysburg National Battlefield Park that reads something like, "The high water mark of the Confederacy." If you recall, July 4th is around the time of the cresting of the Nile in Egypt. The high water mark. Is this another subtle hint of Freemasonic orchestration of the Battle of Gettysburg, and even of the entire American Civil War? Assassin John Wilkes Booth's real name was Botha. His father and grandfather were buried in Jewish cemeteries. John Wilkes Booth converted to Catholicism, but this was most likely a ploy to hide his Jewish origins. Many conspirators in the assassination of Lincoln were given asylum in the Vatican. Lincoln was a problem for the banking powers because he would not allow the United States government to borrow from the banks, but issue its own money instead for the war and Reconstruction. Pro-slavery expansion elements in the South certainly wanted Lincoln dead, and abolitionists also for opposing their communist plans for South and North. Booth himself may have been instructed to kidnap Lincoln, but it's believed by some that he lost control of the situation and shot Lincoln instead. So I'll continue in the next part with developments in the United States after the Civil War and with the continuing schemes of the banking powers to create a central bank of the United States and also to reconfigure the United States for their purposes. So until next time.